A warm welcome from my side to this presentation. As noted by the introduction, this session is specifically for our master's and doctoral students on Turnitin and how it is applied in the institution. I would just like to mention, if you are doing a coursework master's qualification, that this presentation will specifically speak to the research module within your degree. Your other task-orientated modules are addressed in the traditional UNISA space. And then the supervisors, you are very welcome to join this session with your students. Just do note that we do present a special training session for supervisors on Turnitin to advise you on the various logistics and processes within the system on how you would find your student submissions so that you can address them in that regard. Now, Turnitin, what is Turnitin? Turnitin is a program that checks for the originality of content. It was acquired by UNISA in an effort to guard against academic misconduct. So things like plagiarism and ghostwriting would fall into that phrase of academic misconduct. However, the main focus for Turnitin is to encourage academic integrity and for students to deliver original work. Okay. Please do make sure that you know what the university's stance is regarding academic integrity, since misconduct is not tolerated by UNISA. This is underscored by the different policies and procedures. Do ensure that you are familiar with the content of the latest versions of those listed. And of course, most important, you need to use your My Life email address for all communication with UNISA, regardless to which desk or supervisor you are writing. You do need to use your My Life email address. Also, any communications in respect of Turnitin would be sent to your My Life address. Okay, so make sure that you are up to date in that regard. So before we continue, just a warning. This is a warning of protection. In other words, that you do need to submit your work yourself only within the formal UNISA submission space. In other words, there where your Turnitin profile is logged within the system and you are going to log in with your My Life email credentials, that is where you would upload your work. Please do not upload your work in duplicate. In other words, this means that you do not give your work to a friend, a colleague, a family member, or definitely not a person you do not know, or your supervisor. You will handle your work yourself, and you will only upload in the dedicated space for that. Otherwise, the originality would be compromised and we would not be able to protect your authorship in this regard. And please be very careful of individuals that sell so-called services of producing a report on your behalf, or that they would promise to they would generate you a good Turnitin in a report. There's no such thing as either a good or a bad report. It is simply a Turnitin report that would check on originality of content, and you will understand this when we discuss the report later within the presentation. Also note that your work is not to be submitted in any alternate space that would be unethical, and it would compromise that specific individual or institution if that did occur. All right, so with that warning settled, let's move on how Turnitin is set up for ease of use within UNISA. Turnitin is integrated with My UNISA. That means you do not have to request Turnitin. You do not have to have a separate login. You would simply go to My UNISA, then specifically the My Modules section, and all of the details in that regard. You receive in a notification that we call the Turnitin welcome notice. So that Turnitin welcome notice is sent to your My Life email address within the first a month or two after you have registered with UNISA. You will receive such an email. Okay. When you then go to the dedicated space on My UNISA, the reports will run automatically. So there's no additional action that you need to take. You simply need to upload your work. Okay. You will see that it will be indicated where you need to log in. Within the email, we give you detailed instructions. There's also a link in that email to a recorded training session that you can visit, as well as a frequently asked questions list. Okay, so you will have that on hand. A good idea might be to save that email on your device that you are using so that you can always refer back to it. So this is typically what you would see within your welcome notice. It will give you the necessary instruction that you have to go to log into My Modules. So when you get to the My UNISA page, you will see in the top right-hand corner, there are different buttons, and you're going to log into My Modules. And that will take you to a window where you would be able to locate the Turnitin submission space. Very important. Note that when you are enrolled within the space, you remain in that space for the duration of your study. In other words, if you entered the Turnitin space within the 2024 group, or if you entered it within the 2025 group, you are not going to change groups in the following year. So when you started out last year, for example, let's say you registered last year for your proposal and you started with your qualification, then you were accommodated in that group and you're going to stay in that group. So you're not going to get a new Turnitin space every year. That space where you are allocated makes provision for the whole of the study or the research. So you will do your dissertation or your thesis from beginning to end within that space, even if it takes you 3 years or 4 years to complete that. Okay, so you're going to stay in that space to continue. And you will also see that that space makes provision for the different stages of your study. Okay, so just be aware of that you're going to remain in that space and not to expect a new space in the following year. So typically you will go to the My Modules button, usually in the middle top of the window, and you click on the drop down and you will see your college acronym. It will say M&D and it will specify Turnitin. So that is where you will go to upload your work for processing. Okay. When you upload for the very first time, okay, within this space, you will get a pop-up note that's going to ask you to accept the Turnitin EULA. That is the end user license agreement. It is a Turnitin required. It is what we use to protect your submissions and to safeguard your authorship going forward. So you need to click on the orange button that says, I accept the Turnitin EULA. Okay. And when you've accepted that once, that is fine. You are going to remain in this space. There is no need to accept it multiple times. You will not have to accept it for every upload. Turnitin will give you a pop-up note that's going to say thank you for accepting the Turnitin EULA. So then you will know it has recognized your acceptance and your profile is then secure. Going forward, there will only be a note to say, thank you, you have already accepted the Turnitin EULA. So when you upload subsequent documents after the first one, it will just give you a little note and that would remind you that it will be processed. There's no additional action required from your side. Okay. Now, in preparing your work, for the Turnitin process. Okay, we have a few things that you need to keep in mind. So this is slide 10. We have two slides of important note. That is slide 10 and slide 11 that we will see shortly. Okay, so whenever you get communication and you get referred to slide 10 or 11, it would be this information. And this is to assist you in how to best prepare your work for the process and to streamline the way forward for your study and when you complete, when your work needs to move on to the examination process. So firstly, any of your documents need to be uploaded in Microsoft Word. Okay, specifically the .docx version. Okay, so that is where you are going to prepare your work in a .docx, and that is what you would upload. And within this slide, we give you the requirements for the proposal and the fully completed study or research. In other words, the one that you are going to upload when you complete the study or research and your work is to be sent to an examiner. Okay. For these submission spaces, you do have to include a title page, your front pages, as that assists in protection of your authorship. In other words, they do need to include your name, student number, your qualification details, a declaration, index, and abstract, that which is necessary, that which the proposal or your complete dissertation or thesis would comprise of. So those initial pages have to be in there. They need to be included, as well as your bibliography or your references. Okay, those need to be included. In other words, at the end of the proposal or when you upload the fully completed thesis, at the end, you have your list of references or bibliography that needs to be included in there. Okay, so it serves to confirm the content within your document, even if you did use in-text citations, or for example, if you used footnotes. Okay, the referencing style or requirement for that study or research must be followed, and if that means that you have that list, it has to be included. Just a quick note on the side for those of you who might wonder, wouldn't this unnecessarily impact on the report findings? No, quite the contrary. Any findings within these pages simply serve as confirmation of adherence to instruction and the truth of content within the specific submission. So it will not unnecessarily or unduly impact on the findings within the report. So this is a complete, comprehensive report that then would be generated for your proposal submissions. And of course, when you complete the dissertation or thesis, we need an all-inclusive comprehensive report for the examination process. However, for your chapters, okay, so your chapters that are work in progress, okay, the requirement is slightly different because this is during your time of study where you and your supervisor would be working on the content. So again, the file type should be Microsoft Word with file extension .docx. Okay, so that is how you are going to prepare your work. Now, for the chapters, you do not need a title page. You do not need any front pages. You can simply include a heading like this example here. You can have a small table that has your name in it, also the student number, the title. For example, here I have chapter 1 as the draft, and then the date of upload. And immediately after, you can start with the content of the chapter. Okay, so for the chapter specifically, you do not have to include a list of references or a bibliography. Okay, so obviously, in-text citations need to remain. That is very important, but a list at the end of the chapter is not necessary. So you do not put it in here. So simply the content, okay, of the chapter is going to be submitted. You do have different options for your chapters, and they are provided for every chapter that you write. So please note, you never combine chapters. Okay, so you don't upload 2 chapters in one space. If it is chapter 3 that you are uploading, you are only going to upload chapter 3. You're not going to combine it with another chapter. So this space does make provision for 6 chapters. Should it happen that you need to write a 7th chapter, if that is required by your supervisor, then you can drop us an email and we will assist in that regard. But do not combine your chapters. Also, if you only write 5 chapters, you will see on the system it makes provision for the 6th chapter. You do not need to upload the 6th chapter. Just a quick note that you can send us, and we will accommodate you also in that regard. Okay. When you upload your work, it will be queued for processing. You need to allow a 48-hour window for the UNISA process to complete. The actual Turnitin portion where it generates the report does not take that long, but just to ensure that the full UNISA cycle is completed. In other words, UNISA receives your submission, it is sent to Turnitin. When we receive it at the Turnitin, we process it and prepare the report, and then it lies in waiting until UNISA collects that report and attaches it to your submission. And as soon as that report is attached to your submission, it will be available online to both you and the supervisor. Okay, so it means both of you can view the report. You also have the advantage that it is possible to open it simultaneously. Maybe you need to discuss something over the phone with your supervisor, then both of you can have that open, okay, and review that. There are 3 options for your chapters. Okay, so you will also see that you've got 3 options for your proposal, and then there are 3 options for your chapters. That means you can do a draft. So when you upload, let's say for argument's sake, chapter 1 draft, a report will be generated, and then you can discuss the report findings with your supervisor. Your supervisor would give you advice, guidelines, etc., that you can use to work on that draft. When you've done your revisions and your supervisor is satisfied in that regard, then you can continue to upload the revision option of chapter 1 to generate a fresh report. And you would have that opportunity again to discuss that with your supervisor. If necessary, additional revisions could be made, and you can work still on that content before you upload the final version of your chapter. So when that is ready, you upload the final version of your chapter, and a report is going to be generated for chapter 1 final. Okay, so again, please do not stress. If you do the draft, the revision, and the final, there will be no conflict with your own work. In other words, when you upload the final version of chapter 1, it is not going to look as if you attempted to self-plagiarize, or it will not pick up anything in the draft or the revision version. So it would be a new report with acknowledgement to your authorship in the draft submissions. So it will not inflate any of the findings in the report. Then note your final submission space. In other words, for the completed dissertation or thesis, when your work is ready for examination, there is only one option, and that option will only become available after you have completed your chapters. Okay, so there's just one final option, because at that point we only need an all-inclusive report for the formal process of examination. everything would have already gone through Turnitin. Everything would have already been reviewed by your supervisor and addressed. So this is just to create that final all-inclusive report that would accompany your documentation to the examiner. Okay, so here we have an example where you can see this is what your submission space could look like. So it would say proposal draft, proposal revision, proposal final, and the same with the chapters. So in this example, we can see where the student had already uploaded. We've got little green buttons. Chapter 6 revision wasn't necessary, so there was no submission in that regard. And then the final upload, it was also marked in green to say that the submission was received. Okay, so you can see on your profile what that looks like. Please note, if you've uploaded and it says queued or pending, it is not an error. Okay, just be patient. This is your 48-hour window. It should not queue for longer than 48 hours. So if it is queuing for 3 days, then you need to report this to your supervisor so that they can consult the UNISA technical department on why it has not yet been sent to Turnitin. We can only assist once it is received at the Turnitin end. Queued means it's on its way to Turnitin from UNISA. Okay, so it's not an error, so just be patient in that regard. If there is a message like it says error, or it might say report unavailable, it doesn't mean that Turnitin didn't work. You need to look at the message, and that is easily done by clicking on the blue encircled question mark. So that will tell you why you cannot see a report. So in this case, it says the file that was uploaded appears to be corrupt. Okay, so if a file is corrupt, or if the file is, for instance, password protected, my UNISA will not further process that submission. So these are the general rules and expectations of file submissions within my UNISA. So obviously, if something is corrupt, it would not be able to be processed further, and we cannot generate a Turnitin report for that. So do make sure if there is any message, okay, click on the question mark, see what the message is so that you can act accordingly, because if this file is corrupt, it needs to be reloaded. Okay, so check your file requirements, and remember, in the M&D space, it will not accept a file unless it is a Microsoft Word file .docx, okay, for the processing. An example, once your report is generated, it is going to be attached to your submission. When you see a percentage in a color-coded block, that says that is your similarity index. Please do not call it a plagiarism percentage. This is not what Turnitin does. Turnitin checks the originality of content. It gives you a similarity index, which is an indication of the portion of non-original content within the submission. Okay. Also, the color coding bears no meaning. So it doesn't mean if it's green that it's good, or if it's red that it is bad. It is simply a color coded block to project the percentage on, and there is no prescribed similarity index. In other words, there's no cutoff percentage, there's no specific percentage requirement that you need to meet. The reason for that is that you need to ensure that the academic objectives are being met for your qualification, because your qualification is obtained from UNISA. Okay, so the intent here is not that you should appease Turnitin or meet with a specific Turnitin requirement. It's not Turnitin that's going to give you your degree. It is UNISA that is going to give your degree. Okay, so please, you have to revisit the Turnitin M&D training materials so that you are aware of what is required. So maybe if you've worked for quite some time, let's say you've worked several weeks or a couple of months on a chapter or two, and you might have forgotten today's training, you can revisit that so that you are aware. So Turnitin will check the content of your submission against a database with different repositories. So there are basically three larger repositories. The first one, periodicals, just a loose term. That means that is the space where we find different publications, conference papers, etc., and so forth, that would be located in there. Then you have internet repositories, current and archived sites, and then of course a student paper repositories, which you would see reflected as submitted works within the report. Note here that this repository does not comprise only of UNISA Turnitin submissions. It also contains submissions from other South African universities as well as the universities in Africa. So you might not be aware of this, but the majority of Africa also utilizes Turnitin, as does all of the other continents. Okay. So those submissions are then recorded within this repository to safeguard the authorship of the various students. Okay. So it compares the content that is received to that, and it then generates an originality report. So it is not called a plagiarism report. It is an originality report. You can call it a Turnitin report or a report of non-original content, but please do not refer to it as a plagiarism report. This is not what Turnitin does. It checks for the originality of the content. It checks the integrity of the submission, which would help to identify original authorship, and it guards against academic misconduct in line with the institutional policy requirements. Okay, so that students do need to deliver original work to obtain qualifications. Okay, so in the originality report, okay, it will pick up everything that is not original. So it is going to highlight things like names and titles. It will highlight discipline-related terminology. Of course, if there is copy text in the content, that will be also highlighted and matched against the different sources, and any integrity infringement or ghostwritten content would be picked up within the specific document. So if it's not original to you as an author, that is what would be highlighted in the document. It is not wrong if Turnitin highlights names and titles or discipline-related terminology, for example, or let's say it highlights portions of an index or cover page, as those are prescribed or they are standard templates that you might use. So it's not wrong if Turnitin highlights that, because it highlights it as it is not original. It doesn't say that you plagiarized. So what would be the difference between something which is not original and something that would be seen as plagiarism? Best example here would be the use of a direct quote. If you include a direct quote in the content with source acknowledgement, okay, to the original source of where that quote was derived from, it is not plagiarism. Okay, in other words, you attend a conference, one of the speakers makes a statement, and you want to use that statement as it speaks to your own research as well within your work. Yes, of course you can, but you would need to put it in inverted commas, and you have to acknowledge, okay, the person who made that statement. So it is not original to you as the author of this document, okay, but it is not plagiarized because you have acknowledged, okay, the source of that quote. However, if you were to use a statement made by another person or content from another individual's work, and it is not duly credited. In other words, you've used the direct words from somebody, but you didn't put it in as a direct quote. It comes across as that you are pretending that it is your own. And that is not original. It's still not original because it's not your own. But in that specific instance, it is viewed as plagiarism because you are presenting that content under your own name. So that would be the difference between something which is not original as opposed to something that would also be seen as plagiarized content. Okay, so remember that your report percentage is not plagiarism. It only reflects the non-original content within the specific document, and there is no cutoff percentage. The reason for that is that you could potentially have a very low percentage. Let's say you've got 8% or 12% on the report. Okay, so here we have an example of report findings, and in this specific report, we've got an 89% overall similarity index. But that similarity index is not our focus, okay? Because even if you've got a very low similarity index, like the 12%, okay, which appears to be low, but when the report is reviewed or analyzed and any misconduct is identified within that report, including plagiarism, okay, it will be unacceptable, okay? So it doesn't matter how low your percentage is, the report is still going to be analyzed, and if any misconduct is detected, like plagiarism or ghostwritten content as examples, then it will be unacceptable. Though you could also potentially have, let's say, a percentage of 20%, okay, then, and your content is being analyzed and being reviewed, then if your different objectives have been met, your supervisor has noted your accurate use of the appropriate referencing style, etc., within the specific document, and you've met with the expectations that were set for that specific submission, and there is no other forms of misconduct detected, then that 20% could be acceptable for the specific submission. Because it can be related to subject terminology, it can be related to quotes or names or titles. Okay. But remember, we don't look at the overall similarity index. What we look at would be the individual sources. Okay, so these matches. In the column on the right-hand side, you have a breakdown of the different sources with matching content. Now, for these, we can see that they have individual percentages. These percentages are not cumulative to your overall index. Okay, so they are individual in relation to that specific source. Now, what does that mean? It means where you see number 1, and it's also color-coded for ease of reference, it is blue, and then on the left, in my text, I have portions here that are highlighted in blue and they're marked with a little number 1. So throughout this whole document, we can only see one portion here of the document in the slide, but throughout this whole document, there are other instances of blue highlighted content, and we can see that they are also marked with number 1. So all the little number 1s, all of the portions highlighted in blue would mean that they match source number 1, which in this instance is an internet source, and it says 26%. So that means all of the number 1s are 26% of the content of the submission matching to this specific source. I don't have number 2 here in this little window. We've got number 3 where we can see yes and number 3, and we've got purple highlighted text here. So there are several other instances in the document also highlighted in purple, marked with a number 3, and it means that they match source number 3. And in this instance, 15%. In other words, 15% of the content of the submission matches source number 3. Okay. So these are your individual source match percentages. And for these, we give you a guideline. Okay. So a guideline meaning that any one of them should be less than 5%. In other words, my 26% is clearly way above the 5% guideline. Even my number 2, which is 23, if we look at number 4 here that peaks out at the bottom, this is 9%, but it's still above the 5% guideline. Okay, so that guide is in place to help you to see if you've overutilized one specific source, for example. It also helps to protect you. You can against the overutilization, for example, of quotes that could infringe on copyright requirements of a specific source. Okay. So that is your guideline for the findings, and that you know in which areas you need to review, or you might need to paraphrase in your own words, or you need to look for additional sources to support your argument in that specific context. So these are the ones that you look at, and remember, they're not cumulative to your overall index. So it doesn't mean, let's say, if you take out everything that is blue, that your 89 is going to drop by 26%. Okay, so we do not look at the overall similarity index. We look at the individual matches, and that is the guidance when it is being reviewed by your supervisor, and you can discuss the findings with your supervisor in that regard. Remember that plagiarism, or even ghostwriting, which is also considered plagiarism, is not acceptable. It doesn't matter what the percentages are within the specific document. Okay, you focus on delivering original work. Your focus should never be to try and reduce the percentage, but rather to use that information to identify the areas that require more attention and that you have to address, or where you have to build your academic skills, or to learn more about research ethics, for example. Okay, so the focus is never on trying to reduce the percentage, but rather to deliver original work, to present your work using your own words, use your quotes sparingly, and then, of course, when in doubt, cite your sources. Always. Okay. So never neglect that. Okay, so to give the due acknowledgement. Okay, and to adhere to the referencing style specific for your subject field. Okay, or that what was prescribed within your department to you. And remember the guideline, we apply this as a universal rule throughout the institution. I know some of you might be quite surprised by this because it is a very wide guideline, but the guideline accommodates for incidental matches like subject terminology, names and titles, etc., would be included for a source within that 5% guideline that you have. It's very important that you always discuss the findings with your supervisor. There are exceptions. There are certain circumstances where a specific expectation was set for a submission, and that you need to adhere to that. Okay. You do not need to rework everything that is highlighted. Okay. In some instances where it is highlighted, it provides confirmation, it gives proof of the content that was delivered and how you engaged with the relevant sources, for example. Okay, so there are conditions where certain portions of matching text would be allowed according to the expectations that were set for that specific submission. Okay, so do bear that in mind. Okay. When you deliver your work. Okay. For any content support, of course, that is why your supervisor is there, or if you have a lecturer, if you're doing coursework modules where there's task-orientated submissions that you need to make, that is your first port of call. Then, of course, your prescribed study materials or resources that were provided are very important, valuable to you would be to attend the M&D Research Training workshops. Here is a link within this copy of the presentation that you would always, that you would also receive, and you can always go to that to get the updated information from the site. And then we have the UNISA library pages for guidance. So if you go to the LIP guides, they will host different resources on research ethics, academic integrity, and referencing styles. Also make sure that you do know who your personal librarian is for your college. They are well equipped to support you and to give you direction and guide you where to find information within the library that would assist you in your study or your research in that regard. Thank you very much. That has brought me to the end of today's presentation. I trust that you found this helpful. You will also get a list of frequently asked questions. Most of the questions that might arise are covered within that FAQ list. So if you do have a question, immediately go to your FAQ list, check if it is there, and it contains different examples. It shows you little images as well and would guide you in that regard on where to go, what to submit, or how to submit and how to view any notifications of Turnitin. Thank you very much.